In adult life, these boys will build real villages, repairing each year the damage done by the floods. Their sisters have their own preoccupations. They remove their waistbands, a sign of virginity, and place them on models of their future homes. Soon, these girls will be seeking husbands and bearing children. The women of ancient Egypt were renowned for their beauty, and much of the poetry is about courtship.
How delightful, my beloved, to go down with you to the river. I look forward to the moment when you will ask me to bathe before your eyes.
An Egyptian village is a large, extended family, and virtually everybody is related to everybody else. The children may not know what jobs they'll have when they grow up, but many already know who they'll marry. As in ancient Egypt, most girls get married at an early age.
بنفس الطريقة كده وبيرسموا احنا بعد كده قدرنا نشوف ايه الحاجات اللي هم كانوا بيعملوها.
Hanan is 16, and today is her wedding day. This is the last time she'll carry out her domestic duties at the home of her parents. Though not exactly apprehensive, she knows her life will be very different.
I know that once I'm married, everything will change. When you become a housewife, it's very different from being a young girl. Till now, I've done as I please. But in my husband's house, I'll have to ask his permission to do certain things. And if he says no, that's it.
Hanan is one of 13 children. For her mother, Qaidi, it's been a continual struggle to feed and clothe the family. It's a familiar story in the villages along the Nile, and if Qaidi has one hope, it's that her daughter will be more fortunate than she was.
I
wish her every happiness and hope she'll bring her husband much prosperity. I don't want her to be like me. I've had too many children and I've suffered a lot. If she has just 2 children, she'll be able to feed them and send them to school.
In ancient Egypt, a wedding was described as founding a house. Before the festivities, Qaidi inspects her daughter's new home. The groom's mother greets her at the door.
This is the hall leading to the sitting room. This is the sitting room, and we'll have curtains here and here, and the entrance will be here. Here we come to the salon. Here there will also be curtains, and there will be carpets on the floor.
This is all ours, to the horizon. These cattle are ours. The buffalo and donkeys are ours too. All this is ours.
To the ancient Egyptians, monogamous marriage was part of the divine order. Here, the dwarf tailor Seneb is presented in a family group. His children are depicted with their fingers to their lips, the traditional sign of childhood. Egyptian sculptors celebrated the tenderness between man and wife. By the day of the wedding, Hanan and her mother will have spent the dowry. Hanan's eldest brother, Kaidi, must now reassure the groom's family that the dowry has been sensibly spent. Hanan's husband-to-be, Ahmed, looks on as Kaidi signs a document listing the young couple's new possessions. Once the contract has been signed, the couple's dowry furniture, together with gifts from family and friends, is paraded through the village. Everyday events like this shaped the ancient Egyptians' vision of the afterlife. Just as the young couple take their furniture into their new home, their pharaonic ancestors took their everyday possessions into their tombs when they died. Egyptians have always idealized feminine beauty. Servants primp the waxed wig of a queen as she takes her breakfast, but women of all classes wore jewelry and makeup. Among the most ancient customs is the henna-ing of hands, and at a wedding this is made into a special ceremony. While gold, silver, and rare gems were imported from the Near East, eye makeup like kohl came from as far away as Ethiopia.
Love your wife ardently, feed her and clothe her. Fragrant unguents are good for her body. Make her happy all her days, for she is like the field that brings benefit to its owner.
At Hanan's wedding, everyone's contribution is acknowledged, and Kaidi reads out a list of gifts and givers for all to hear. For the ancient Egyptians, marriage was literally for all time. Just as their friends wished them a long and prosperous life on earth, they also hoped and believed their happiness together would continue in life after death. The timelessness of marriage has been captured for all time in the figures of Rahotep and Nofret, two courtiers who lived around 2600 BC at the dawn of Egypt's greatest era. By the time the Romans overran Egypt in 30 BC, the pharaonic world had begun to crumble. Two giant statues, the colossi of Memnon, are all that remain of a once great temple. During the 1,000 years before Christ, the Egyptians suffered many invasions. Although their belief system remained intact, the invaders came to exploit the country as well as to marvel at its culture. The temple behind the colossi was destroyed by an earthquake. Now the newcomers made their own mark. One Roman emperor carved his name on the stone, and casual vandalism has continued from that day on. The Romans conquered Egypt because they wanted her grain. But Egypt was also the gateway to Africa, to a world teeming with wild animals. In amphitheaters throughout the empire, vast numbers of animals were slaughtered for the entertainment of the masses. "5,000 wild animals were killed on the day the Colosseum opened in Rome. During the rule of Nero, the Praetorian Guard slaughtered 400 bears and 300 lions in a single day. Christians and criminals were fed to wild cats. Slaves were forced to kill slaves. Animals were captured far beyond the frontiers of the empire. The Egyptians had deified nature. The Romans enslaved it. No creature was safe. The waters still tumble over the falls at Tisisat, but the mountain elephants have long gone. It wasn't just hunting that drove them to extinction, but the loss of their forest home. Nearby on Lake Tana, papyrus boats enable the woodcutters to exploit the remotest shores. Virtually everyone in Ethiopia cooks with wood, but there's also a heavy demand for building timber. Today, there are 50 million Ethiopians, 3 times as many as in 1950, and the vast majority live off the land. Every year, more forest is felled to satisfy their needs, and all but 1/10 of the original forest has now disappeared. This is eucalyptus. In many areas, it's the only fuel available for cooking. Eucalyptus is a fast-growing tree that has been planted to replace the native forest. It's also a menace. With its thirst for water, it breaks up the soil and causes serious erosion. All that's left of the native forest here is a single acacia tree. The surrounding eucalyptus supports little wildlife. Over much of the highlands, forests have been cleared. After the rains, the fields look lush and green. But with no trees to bind the soil, the land is raked by summer winds, and huge volumes of topsoil are washed into the rivers. Scattered around the Ethiopian highlands, however, are small oases where nature survives. The monastery of Debre Libanos is surrounded by its own Garden of Eden. Ancient Christian traditions are saving wildlife from extinction. The gelada baboon used to be common throughout Ethiopia. Now it's very rare and can only be found in isolated forests like these. Pilgrimage is as important now as it was in medieval times, and on festival days, farmers head for the monasteries. Christianity arrived here in the 4th century. Since then, highland Ethiopia has been predominantly Christian, and the traditions we see today are those of the early church. They still use the sistrum, an instrument played by priests in the temples of ancient Egypt. Ethiopians were long part of a ribbon of Christianity that ran along the Nile from Alexandria in Egypt to the highland headwaters. The churches of Egypt and Ethiopia are linked by common beliefs and centuries of isolation from mainstream European Christianity. Both churches have a powerful monastic tradition, and their spiritual leaders always come from the monasteries. Today's church leader, Paulus V, stands at the end of a long line of Ethiopian patriarchs.
The spiritual life in Ethiopia as a whole is very strong. The monastic life is quite a large number throughout the country, because there are about 1,000 monasteries from the ancient times.
Among the most ancient monasteries are those on the islands of Lake Tana, source of the Blue Nile. Like Debre Libanos, these islands are thick with native forest. Monastic retreats have always been nature reserves. Ethiopian monasteries, like their European counterparts, are great centers of learning and Christianity. In times of turmoil, monks kept alive all the ideas that meant civilization, not just religion, but also history and literature. This parchment Bible is illuminated with the stories that sustain faith. It could well have been produced by monks in the 8th century. The story of the passion and death of Jesus Christ. The material world holds little attraction for monks. Theirs is a life of prayer, poverty, and obedience. Living in sanctuaries of devotion, isolated from the distractions of the outside world, Orthodox tradition dictates that man will find God by contemplating nature. As well as being libraries, monasteries are also nature reserves. For the monks, nature is the other book through which God speaks. Today, these islands are important breeding sites. They are also critical winter habitat for many migrating birds. Respect for bird life is shared by all Ethiopian highlanders. Deep-seated religious traditions derive from Old Testament laws against eating ibis, herons, storks, and web-footed birds. Dietary prohibitions have effectively conserved an astounding 96% of the country's 830 bird species. Even during the famines of recent decades, the birds on Lake Tana were left in peace. To live in harmony with nature is to be close to God. Every monk strives to find himself inside nature's web of life. These men lived by rules laid down in Egypt in the 4th century, the same rules that would later govern monastic life in medieval Europe. Monks themselves do everything necessary to run the monastery. This simple way of life allows them to concentrate on their devotions to God.
No one complains what kind of obligation is assigned to him. This is just an absolute submission of all members. So they do whatever is being asked and required from them. Then they live together. They eat once a day, very minimal and simple food.
The food may be simple, but for young novices, monasteries provide the security their peasant families have never known. Here, they will always be fed and cared for. At Debre Libanos, the life of communal prayer and contemplation continues far into the night. These ancient hymns and psalms have echoed unchanged through the centuries. For some monks, however, life in the monastery is not austere enough. They set themselves apart to live in solitude.
There are people who think even this kind of a very strict communal life is too luxurious for them. So they prefer to isolate themselves from the community. And they make very small contacts for the sake of survival, in order to somebody to offer them a glass of water or a handful of beans or something.
Father Atello came to Debre Libanos as a child. He's been living alone in a cave above the monastery for 30 years. He even avoids contact with the novice who brings his meager meals. When Father Atello first became a hermit, he vowed not to eat, but became too weak to pray. A rigorous routine of prayer dominates his daily life.
When
you plant a tree, it's like giving birth to a child. We are monks without hope or desire of producing offspring. Planting trees brings reward and grace from God. Green plants symbolize virtuous qualities like innocence, kindness, and fertility. As for the wild animals, be they baboons or monkeys, they are playful and friendly, and we enjoy passing time with them. Wild animals are obedient and pleasing to God.
The people who live a monastic and spiritual life, they simply care for everything, even for the trees, even for the stones to be broke into two pieces. They would mind to do that.
Monks are heirs to a long tradition of caring for nature. In Africa, it extends back beyond the pharaohs. In Europe, to St. Francis of Assisi. In Ethiopia, monasteries are a last oasis of hope for much of the country's beleaguered wildlife. Immediately north of Lake Tana is the ancient city of Gondor, former capital of Ethiopia. Its castle was built at a time of great spiritual fervor. It's an emotion that can still be felt today at the annual festival of Timkat, a reenactment of the immersion of Christ by John the Baptist. Timkat celebrates the sanctity of water, and it starts with a parade of the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark is among the holiest of images in Ethiopia. In it, God gave Moses the 10 Commandments. Every year, replicas of all the arks from all the churches are carried on the heads of priests to a pool of Nile water. Just as Christ was baptized in the River Jordan, so the people of Gondor are rebaptized every year in the headwaters of the Nile. Monks dressed in medieval vestments come from all over to take part in this annual festival of spiritual renewal. The ceremony begins with a candlelit crucifix set adrift on the waters. In a reversal of the original baptism, it is the innocent, the children, who baptize the adults, splashing them with holy water. The day is a festival of baptism. For Pope Shenouda, it's deeply linked with the religion of the pharaohs.
They worshipped the Nile as the source of life. We know quite well in the Bible that water is a source of life. And our Lord Jesus Christ spoke about the living water, giving life to others.
But water can be as good for the body as it is for the soul. Near the source of the Nile, whole families gather, drawn to the enduring presence and energy of the river. Here they pray for their sick, their halt and their lame. These are festive occasions. They break bread, drink coffee, and pray. Chants fill the air, summoning up healing spirits. Offerings are made to the gods of the Nile. It's a powerful invocation combining fire and water and blood. Cairo has long been one of the great cities of Islamic learning and art. Sultan Hassan, one of the greatest mosques, was built in the 13th century. Even here, it's hard not to notice influences from ancient Egypt. To enter a mosque is to enter into God's presence. There's more than a hint of the past here. Daily devotions that acknowledge the rising of the sun. Abstract designs based on nature. The banded entryway to eternal life. As an Egyptian, Adel El-Ebt is aware of his rich heritage.
I'm a Muslim, and I cannot be a Muslim till I believe in all prophets from Adam, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We have to believe in all of them and respect them and study them and be good to everybody, whether he's Muslim, Christian, or Jews. You have to respect them. You cannot be a Muslim without respecting the other religions. And it is stated clearly in the Quran that we have to believe in all other religions and prophets and respect them and don't differentiate between either one.
Islam and Christianity stand near the end of the great river of time that is the Nile. But all faiths have always prayed for eternal life and have believed that the way you live this life will determine your status in the next. It's an idea that descends to us little modified since the time of the pharaohs. Countless tomb paintings show funeral processions, with professional wailers weeping for the spirit of the departed. Tombs were filled with everything the dead might be expected to need in the afterlife. Even down to their sandals. Vast numbers of mummified animal gods were also placed in the tombs. This man was buried 6,000 years ago, on the edge of the desert where his body was naturally mummified by the drying sands. Even at that time, people were buried facing the setting sun and provided with food and images for the afterlife. The tradition of preparing for eternity was so strong that by early pharaonic times, realistic sculptures were placed in tombs, waiting to be inhabited by the spirits of the dead. Glass eyes enabled the dead to gaze out on a new life. Monumental tombs ensured not only the afterlife of the pharaoh, but also, through his survival, the spirits of all his people. For the Egyptians, the most terrifying thing in the world was the idea of oblivion, that they would fail the tests that gave them entry into the underworld. The passage they hope to make from death to eternity is recorded in the books of the dead. In the opening of the mouth ceremony, they recite spells over the mummy to restore the powers of life, especially sight and speech, which the spirit will need on the journey ahead. Now the spirit must pass through 28 gates. But to get beyond the guardian gods of the underworld, every spell, every invocation must be word perfect. Here the royal scribe Ani sets off on his journey, accompanied by his wife Tutu.
Make a way for me, for I know you. I know your name, and I know the name of the God who guards you. Mistress of the Sky is her name.
After satisfying each guardian god, he passes through to the next gate, and the journey continues. He is guided by the jackal god Anubis into the house of the two truths to face the ultimate test, where his spirit will either be cast into the hell of oblivion or enter into paradise. Paraded before a jury of gods, to each in turn he declares his innocence.
I have not robbed, nor done violence to any man. I have not caused pain. I have not made suffering for anyone. O blood-eater who came forth from the shambles, I have not killed a sacred bull. I have not trapped birds in the preserves of the gods. I have not caught the fish of their marshland. I have not diverted water at its season. I have not built a dam on flowing waters. I have not fouled the waters.
As confirmation that the dead is telling the truth, his heart is weighed against a feather on the scales of justice. The beast Amut stands ready to devour any hearts laden with sin. Thoth, the god of wisdom, declares the dead person to be true of voice. He is then led to meet Osiris, the god of the underworld, who ushers him into paradise. Out of the mud and water of the Nile, the ancient Egyptians created a paradise on earth. In their imagination, it could not be bettered, and they took the best of it with them to the next world. For 5,000 years, the pharaohs have gazed across the land of Egypt, pleased with what they saw. Plainly, the view has changed. The industrial present has arrived, but it still exists side by side with an agricultural past. More and more people are leaving the countryside and flooding into the cities. In the modern world, men and women live far from nature, far from the world that shaped the beliefs of ancient Egypt. Nevertheless, thoughts of an earthly paradise persist. All societies, all religions across the ages aspire to return to a Garden of Eden. It's a place that lives on in our imagination and can still be found along the headwaters of the Nile. Our ends are in our beginnings, the poet Eliot once said. And the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. What we find along the Nile today is an old idea that has a new resonance. At the core of Egyptian religion lies the belief that men and animals should live in harmony, and that mankind has a responsibility to ensure that all this continues. It's an idea that persists, shimmers in the memory of an ancient time when the Nile was the river of gods.